I'm excited to share Bill as an exclusive sponsor of the Thrivecast. They have been sponsoring the Thrivecast for so long. Thank you, Bill. Our firm has been using Bill for over a decade now. We actually use it in all of our foundational CFO and controllership engagements. We have to turn all of our clients' financial processes digital, and we do that with Bill. And you can check out some webinars and blogs and even toolkits that I build with Bill to help in your firm. So thank you, Bill, for being a sponsor of the Thrivecast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thrivecast. This is exciting. We're in, our 12th year or something like that with this podcast. And we bring on guests. A lot of the guests they help us understand really the world of the profession of accounting. And we have Seth David, which is a very common name in our industry. He is the founder and chief nerd, of course, at Nerd Enterprises. They're renowned for cutting-edge approach, accounting productivity, learning, and Seth has run his own firm, but of course, most people now know him through his courses, his online YouTube channel, and I'm going to dive into a lot of that because I think he's even had some recent changes as to really diving into his work fully as an educator now. So I'm pumped to have Seth on the show. Seth, thanks for coming on the Thrivecast, man.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason. It's an honor.
Yeah, it's very cool. Well, and you honored me and invited me on your show, so we're going to be scheduling that pretty soon. So that's a lot of fun.
Yep, I love having these conversations.
Yeah.
And man, 12 years, congratulations. That's awesome. I knew you'd had this for a while, but I didn't know it was that long. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Greg Kite did it with me for about a decade, the first decade. Then he retired as a co-host, and so I'm going by myself. But I love it. I get to talk to people like you. I can ask anybody, hey, will you be on the show? And it's like, I get to talk to people. It's so cool. I I love it. So, well, cool. So, Seth, I love to there's so much we can talk about. And so I think this is going to be kind of a rambly show. But I want to know your journey. You know, a lot of times I'll prepare for these shows. I spend some time preparing and I have the guests do some preparation. And you went through a hard journey. You're kind of transparent about that. And so I'd love, what is your background journey and some of the personal struggles you went through that kind of brought you here? I think that'll really help listeners.
Yeah. I could probably spend a whole hour just on that.
Yeah.
I think I have in the past, but I'll give you the short version because I know there's a lot that we want to talk about. And the short version is that, and if I had to pick one thing that I learned through all of it, and in some ways, I want to also say that I made my journey hard, right? In some ways, I did it to myself. In many ways,
we all do that, right?
Yeah. Some would argue that I had less control over it than I give credit for there. But in any case, I started out life like a normal kid, grew up on Long Island, middle class family, never wanted for anything, had all our needs met and then some, had loving parents, great home that I grew up in, still love my parents. They're still alive and well, living in Florida now. And, but I was a curious kid. And when growing up, I went to private school, actually. So in some ways, I was very sheltered from the world and what went on in the rest of the world, and namely in public school. So, come to find out that some of the kids from my neighborhood that I grew up knowing, when we got old enough, I learned that, some of them smoked pot. And I'm like, oh, God. And at first I was like, I can't hang out with them. I was taught better than that.
Mm-hmm.
But long story short, then I got curious and I'm like, well, if he's doing it and he seems okay, it can't be that bad. And, so that's kind of how probably the early on story of my life and how I started to define down boundaries is really what it comes down to. And so I smoked pot for the first time. And then it was like, well, I'll smoke pot, but I'm not going to do any other drugs, But then I kept defining down boundaries and I kept doing things for the first time that I swore I'd never do. And, fast forward, age 28, I had gotten my degree in accounting from Pace University. I had actually left school after studying in computer science. went to work on Wall Street as a stockbroker, got my Series 7 license,
Wow.
and then went back to school to get the accounting degree. And as you might guess, my experience on Wall Street really escalated the drug use.
I
That
bet.
was where
Yeah.
I was literally specifically taught by my boss, we work hard and we party hard. I was 21 at the time. He was 26, VP at a big Wall Street brokerage firm. And he basically told me, you have no choice. You're going out with us tonight to party. And I also expect you back in the office tomorrow morning to be on the phones by 8 a.m. or whatever it was, even though I had a commute from Long Island to New York City because our office was literally right off Wall Street.
Wow.
So what do you call it? I learned that lifestyle, that way of living, and I took to it. I loved it.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? Because even when I came into work hungover the next day, all I needed was a little bump, and boom, I was off and running.
Because you were young,
And man,
you could pull stuff off like that when you were that young.
I was 21,
Yeah.
and even with a hangover, with the help of chemicals, I was up, and I loved to. Man, did I like to talk? You know. And I did. And in fact, I convinced myself that it was very effective because I remember the first time, because for, again, another boundary I had defined down was that I would never get high at work. But here we were, hungover. Nobody had the energy to get on the phone. We'd all been partying the night before. We had our own little private office space so no one could see what was going on inside. You know, we had shades drawn, and this one guy turned around. He was sort of like the resident Coke dealer. And he was like, does anybody want a bump? And I was the curious, courageous, adventurous one. And I was like, sure, I'll do it. And he gave me a bump. Next thing I know, I'm on the phone and I closed an account. Big trade, 1,000 shares, opening account, $600 commission. For a 21-year-old to make $600 off of a 20-minute phone call is like, holy crap, especially in those days.
Yeah.
This was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So anyway, that caught up with me, of course. And by the time it caught up with me, I had gone back to school, gotten my accounting degree. I employed the same philosophy. I would go to school. I would take copious notes. I would study. I used to type up my notes so that by the time I took a test, I barely had to study anymore.
Yeah.
And then I'd party on the weekends, but it caught up with me to where I was working as an auditor and I was no longer able to show up to work, and eventually I landed in, the first rehab, then the second. And then the third and so far final rehab was what landed me in California. I left New York, went to California to go to rehab program my father found out about that he felt was going to be good. And I think he also felt it would be good to get me out of my element.
Sure.
But if there's one thing I had to say that I learned from that whole experience, especially now fast forwarding to today, which, come this April, if all goes well, I'll have 25 years clean.
Wow.
And
congratulations.
I mean, it's and it's interesting. I still do meetings. In fact, the one meeting I do for sure every week is one that I've started in a format that I had been exposed to, but couldn't find any other meetings in this format. So I said, screw it, I'm just going to create it. And it's more of a learning style. It's more of like, let's open up our literature. Let's ask questions. How do I deal with this? Everyday life questions, but how do we then go to what's in the print?
Yeah.
And find where the answers are in the print based on what the program of recovery teaches us, which really, when you get over the initial, drugs and chemicals that you might be addicted to, it's really about coping and life skills.
Yeah.
Not so much, like the drugs aren't the problem anymore.
Ah, right.
The problem is me, right? The problem is centered in my mind and in my thinking. And the process of recovery helped me retrain the way I think. Some would call it brainwashing, but if it's brainwashing, fine. That's what I needed. I needed to be brainwashed, right?
Yeah.
I needed to get clean. Now my brain is clean.
Yeah.
So anyway,
the
one thing though, that if I had to underscore anything, I feel like I shouldn't take credit and say I feel it comes right out of our literature. The foundation principle of every one of the 12 steps is humility.
Okay.
And humility is the key.
Okay.
It's the whole key right there.
And that's kind of how you approach it now. And of course you're very transparent and authentic about it, but it's basically I need to be careful. So I need to keep going to my meetings. And I think and maybe the world's changing a little bit. I think we're all learning to be more transparent, authentic, and honest with the communities that we're in. And we run a community, me and my partner run a community, and that community is for people to be real about the hardships of running their own firm, because that's not easy, teaching team, dealing with a client base, pricing, growing, all that stuff is it's pretty difficult. So one thing we always say is accounting firm owners should never be running a firm alone. Don't do it alone. And it's a lonely business, when you're doing it alone. And it sounds like a lot of the things you learned is community is what's going to really help you start to be authentic and humble with yourself even.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. One of the things, you get to the 12th step, and what the 12th step teaches us is that we have to give it away to keep it, meaning the program of recovery, which means we have to work with others and help them. And when the time came and I'd actually hired a marketing expert to help me grow my business, not knowing anything about recovery himself, he brought up Zig Ziglar's quote, you help enough people get everything they want and you'll have everything you want.
Right.
And it rang so familiar to me based on our principle of the 12th step, which is it's the same basic thing. You help others, right? And that's the main thing. If I go out there and make my number one job in life to be to help others, then I'll feel fulfilled. And the rest will just fall into place. It's almost like I don't have to worry about money.
Right.
If I'm out there genuinely and authentically being useful to others, all that will come to pass.
Yeah.
It's been my experience now. Initially, it was the theory that I was taught. Now I can say 25 years later, it's been my experience. And I'll tell you something. The the perfect example that I think of is by the time I was probably about 9 years clean, I'm sitting in a meeting. In fact, the meeting I was referencing that had the format that I liked that I had to recreate because that meeting eventually went away. But basically, there was this guy who sat in this room, and there was like 100 people that would come to this meeting every week because it was very powerful. And he would have people raise their hands and ask questions. And he just had very good knowledge of two of our main books in the AA program, which is what's called the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then there's another book that was written in the 1930s. Then they wrote 12 Steps and 12 Traditions in the 1950s with 20 years of actual experience behind them. So it was almost like, here's the more succinct, no punches pulled sort of add-on to expand and enlarge on our understanding of the steps.
Right.
And he had really good knowledge of both books, but in particular, he focused on that second one. And he would just open up to a page. He would know exactly where to go to read what was there to answer your questions. So one day, I'm in that meeting, and by this time, I had started working as a consultant. I had left my last job at the last CPA firm where I worked. And then I was starting to close the doors to my consulting business to go work for a client. And things were going very well. He was paying me a good salary. I kept a couple of clients on the side, and I was doing very well on the outside, at least, for sure. I was doing much better on the inside too. At 9 years clean, things get better.
Yeah.
So I raised my hand and I said, look, I'm experiencing a lot of success in my career, a lot of material success, right? We talk about money, property, and prestige. And on those levels, I was experiencing a lot of success and inside as well. But my concern, I said to him, was that I don't want this all to go to my head, because I know how arrogant I used to be before I got clean, and it was like, you talk about, the best way I heard it described is, as addicts, when we're active, we have this tremendous ego coupled with an extremely low self-esteem.
Oh, wow.
And in between those two is the gaping hole that we're trying to stuff as much drugs as we can into, or as much food, or as much sex, or whatever we want to fill that hole with. I mean, what an image, right?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
So I raised my hand and I said, what do I need to read in order to kind of prevent against that kind of big shotism? And I'll read you, what he had me read. I kind of typed it up as a quote out of the book. And it's in this book called The 12 and 12. If anybody wants to check me, you're welcome to. It's on page, I think it's 90 or 92, somewhere around there. It says, now that we're in AA and sober and winning back the esteem of our friends and business associates, we find that we need to exercise special vigilance. As an insurance against big shotism, we can often check ourselves by remembering that we are today sober only by the grace of God, and that any success we're having is far more His than ours. In other words, I can't take the credit. And if you're not a religious person, just so you know, in the program, we talk about, you have your own concept of God.
Yeah.
Whatever that means to you, as long as it's not you.
Yeah.
Right? As long as it's not me, I'm covered.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah. Well, that's a cool, man, that's an awesome journey. So it's really journeying away from everything you do being centered around yourself, and you trying to, meet meet the needs or fill that hole with something that's going to hurt you. It's going to kill you. And, going through that kind of pulls away from that. We all have that in some sense. Even if we don't get addicted to one thing, we're all trying to stuff a hole with something.
Yeah.
And so just being aware of that it's not us really, it can be other people and in a community that can help us as long as we're being honest and transparent.
Mm-hmm. And on that point, and going back to, the bigger picture and the topic of humility and then community and giving back, a lot of people come into our program and the first thing they want to know, everybody recognizes I have a very low self-esteem. And of course, the obvious question is, how do I increase my self-esteem? How do I regain my self-esteem? And a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, by committing esteemable acts. And to me, that's like answering using a word in its own definition. It doesn't help. It doesn't clear anything up. It's about as unclear as one could get. What does that mean? What's an esteemable act? And sure, you could give me an example, but my preference is to have something much more practical. And what I eventually learned, and it honestly took me years to really be able to put my finger on this, but it's laid out in our literature over and over again. It's about making ourselves useful to others.
Nice.
When I go out there and I join in a community and I provide helpful answers, and there's no profit motive. I understand that when I go into a Facebook group for accountants or whatever community I'm in for accountants, and I simply and selflessly provide help and answers and say, here's your answer. And there's no profit motive, complete absence of profit motive. And then I start getting the feedback from people who respond because I've been truly helpful and they're genuinely grateful. That's when esteem starts improving because I'm actually making myself useful to others. And to me, that's the whole the day. That's why community works as well as it does when it does, is because the people who are in that community are out there selflessly just there to be useful to others.
Yeah.
Period. And then, like I said earlier, then the rest falls into place and I end up making money anyway. And that's okay.
Yeah, I love it. Well, and you've kind of described what I think what we've seen with the accounting profession is really, and a lot of accounting professionals, they don't run their business well, but they just want to help people. They really do. Yeah. And a lot of times that desire to help gets them in trouble because they want to help people, but they don't price for the value that they actually are. And so you eventually ran your own firm. So it sounds like you worked for other CPA firms, but then you started running your own firm. And how long did you run your own firm? You did that a while, right?
I started the first version of Nerd Enterprises as a DBA in 2003.
Okay.
That's when I started. And I started it actually really as a side hustle before that term existed.
Yeah.
And so I was working at, what became the last CPA firm that I worked for. And I started putting ads on Craigslist. And I started putting ads I learned a little bit of HTML.
Yeah.
And so because I've learned that on Craigslist, there was an option, very few people used it, where you could actually HTML code your ads. So I pulled out, this is going to date me, but I used Microsoft Front Page to design a cool looking ad. I learned that I had to upload any images to my website. So I got the website, I got the domain Nerd Enterprises in 2003, which I was surprised to get. I filed the DBA for the Nerd Enterprises name. I didn't want to just be like Seth's Accounting. I didn't want to be sort of pigeonholed into just doing accounting. I knew I could do much more than that. So I started placing these HTML-based ads on Craigslist to make me stand out. And most of those in those days were focused on providing help for people where I could help them designing things in Excel. I used to love sitting with a spreadsheet and writing complex formulas, deeply nested conditional statements to accomplish whatever thing it was that somebody needed accomplished.
Yeah.
And very few people out there at the CPA firm where I was the only one who had those kind of Excel skills. The managing partner used to call me into his office to help him tweak some of his own spreadsheet. Yeah. He's like, I know there's a way to do this and I know you know how to do it. So here, and so it was like that, but that's how I kind of started.
Yeah.
And, eventually I went from that to, I found a marketing company actually. And this is where I suspect I started picking up a thing or two about marketing.
Yeah.
Because I worked for a marketing company as a business manager. They needed somebody like 3 days a week. And by that time I was sick and tired of working at the CPA firm. So I gave notice. And I went to work for this marketing company 3 days a week. And the other 2, I just had to pick up my own clients, which through those Craigslist ads, I figured out pretty quickly I could easily supplement the 2 days. It was a question of when could I get to a level where I could count on the steady flow of clients and even leave that marketing company. So I very slowly sort of swung from one vine to the next, so to speak, until I felt like I had enough to be on my own, because I was very worried about making sure I brought in enough money to pay the bills. I had a girlfriend,
Yeah.
we lived together, we had dogs, I had responsibilities. So.
Yeah, you had dogs, man, and
Yeah.
Well, so it's so cool to hear how these stories travel. Then, because you've done a lot of work with Intuit, and so then you started doing a lot of Intuit training, and so did they just start seeing some of your stuff online? Is that how you got working with them?
When I hired that marketing consultant, the first thing he told me after I kind of downloaded to him everything I was doing, which included, I was using webinar software. It was Adobe Connect. It's still around.
Yeah.
But one day I said, I don't need live people in the webinar with me. I could use it just to record a video tutorial on QuickBooks. And I was doing that and putting them up like every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I was making 3 videos a week.
Yeah.
And I wasn't doing any editing. There was 0 editing. And, it was just record and go. And so I lived with whatever mistakes. If I made a mistake, I would correct it right there in the recording and explain it. And I went with that. And this guy looked at all the stuff I was doing, including that, and especially that. And he said, you got to get these videos on YouTube. And I was like, really? This was 2008. So I was like, I thought YouTube was just for people posting videos of like burning Elmo dolls and laughing at the fact that he's laughing while he's on fire. And he's like, no, there's that definite business use case.
Yeah.
And so I looked around and the other thing he said to me was, and you got to get Camtasia so you can edit and clean up some of these videos and make them a little more polished. He's like, not too polished. I like the authenticity. That was, he was clear with me about that. But, he definitely wanted me using something a little more sophisticated. And I did. I said, okay. At that point, I was just going to take his word for it. And even then, by the way, my intention 100% was that I was going to put up these videos and attract the small business owners who needed the help. In fact, soon after that, I started a QuickBooks blog.
Yeah.
And one of my first posts and videos was about how to handle the accounting for an NSF check.
Yeah.
And the first comment I got was from some business owner who said, I've had 3 interns in here who couldn't figure out how to do this. I watched your video and learned in 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, I was right. I'm onto something.
Yeah,
here.
that's the value. That's the value of this world of video, Yeah.
And this was before everybody was doing it, right? And what I did, by the way, because I wanted to research it, so once he told me this, I started looking around YouTube for existing channels that had QuickBooks videos, and all I could find, honestly, were like a handful of college professors who were doing videos for their own students. And it was like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Ben Stein.
It was tough.
Click here, reconcile, banking. It was terrible. So I was like, but I saw that as, man, what a massive opportunity. Yeah. In fact, I got bold and I said, you know what? I bet not only can I do this, but I can make this fun and exciting for people. That's where I'm going to go against the grain, which I didn't know at the time, but as a very smart marketing strategy is finding ways to go against the grain, to go against popular belief and go out there and say, hey, you know what? You might think it's bookkeeping and it's boring, but I'm going to show you how and why this can actually be exciting.
Yeah. Well, and I have a question on here about your YouTube channel, like, because we've been building the YouTube channel for probably a couple years, and you've got to spend some time doing that. And your YouTube channel has thousands of videos. I think 32,000 subscribers is a lot. Now, I know YouTubers, they do 1 million, if you do 1 million or more, you're really you're in the limelight, right? But you and I are niche. We're niched into a certain profession. And so I think 32,000 subscribers is a lot. So how long did it take to get to that size in your, I guess since 2008 when you started?
2008 to 2024. And, I think I told you off recording that I'm a little embarrassed about that number.
Yeah.
But only because there are people in the accounting world with many more subscribers who have been at this for a much shorter period of time.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I'm like, man, I must be doing something horribly wrong here. But then I know I'm not.
No.
And I know why I'm not. It's just I have to frequently remind myself of what I'll share with you, because I'm sure now others are wondering, like, what does he mean by that? Because I'll be the first one to say, in some respects, I'm doing it all wrong. Right. Because I'm not doing the things that people do to get to 1 million subscribers. Right. I'm starting to make some changes along those lines, and I'll share those. Yeah. But primarily, I think about Seth Godin's TED Talk about he talks about the purple cow. I think it's called Tribes or something like that.
Yep.
He's done a few, but if you find the one where he's talking about tribes, that's the one where I believe at one point he talks about the fact that, I don't want 1 million subscribers. I want 1,000 like raving diehard fans who love my stuff.
Yeah.
And if those 1,000 people tell 1,000 people, that's a much more effective and powerful way to get to 1 million, right?
Yeah.
1,000 times 1,000.
Yeah. That's how it works. And so, but I think we're in the world of, get as many as you can. And I think you and I and other people want to have impactful, and I think a lot of thought leaders in the accounting profession, they do want to have impact. I think that's a lot of the reasons why they do it. So I think impact to me is way more valuable. That's hard to measure, though. It's hard to measure.
We have to define impact, right?
We have to define it, and it's hard to go, I impacted 5 people today, and so that's so hard. But boy, we get a thrill out of a number, right? That subscriber number going up.
The real question is, how effectively can I influence behavior? Right? If you really want to get into like what it means to be a quote unquote influencer, which for the record, I hate that term, right? I feel like I feel like it's the opposite of humble. It removes humility from the equation. It suggests that I am like on a plane above and people are following me. And I don't like that. I want to be at the same level with everyone I'm talking to. I want to roll up my sleeves and just say, let's get this done. Right? Whatever this is, you want to learn some of the tricks that I've learned, how to get things done more effectively and more efficiently in QuickBooks Online. Let's roll up our sleeves. We're on the same level. We're on the same wavelength. Let's just do this. Let's work together. I don't like this idea of a hierarchy and followers and subscribers or whatever.
Yeah, I love it.
Never really sat well with.
Yeah, I love it.
So, and funny story around those lines. So years ago, and you asked about like how I got into training with Intuit and stuff. So the year before QuickBooks Connect started, they had started what at that time they called the VIP Influencer Summit. And in that first year, if I remember correctly, they invited 40 of the quote unquote top most influential people around the world to come to their headquarters and participate in this like 2.5 day thing that they did. Now, I got the email apparently, and it looked like just another conference, and I was like, I don't have time. And I really honestly just dismissed it without even really reading it. It was just like, it's just look cool, but not for me, not now. So a few days later, I hear from a colleague of ours who says, hey, I heard from Kim Amsbot Intuit that you haven't RSVP'd to the Influencer Summit. And I'm like, I have no idea what that is. I must not have gotten the email. And I reached out to Kim, and then and also she must have told Kim also. So Kim reached out to me and said, hey, Seth, here's the invite. Would really love for you to make it, which kind of clued me in like, wow, they actually really want me there. Like, this isn't just, like, it's not like they're saying that to everybody, right? Like all of a sudden it felt special. And then I looked at when she resent it and I was curious. So I searched my archived emails and sure enough, there it was. I had just dismissed it. So anyway, so I was very honored, and that again is where I had to check myself against that whole big shotism thing. Right. Because I was like, I didn't think that many people noticed my videos. I thought I was just doing my thing in my little garage here in Burbank, California. I was getting clients off of Craigslist. I didn't think anybody really cared that much beyond like a small circle of people. But apparently they took notice. And next thing I know, I'm at this VIP Influencer Summit. Later on, they renamed it. It wasn't called Influencer. It was the VIP Summit. They later renamed it to Influencer because people were getting upset. Like, why am I not a VIP? And so they had to start making it clear to people, like, the people we're inviting to this are people who, as I said a few minutes ago, can influence decisions. So that, in other words, if quite frankly, I put a video out there and say, hey, you all have to start using Notion in your practice because I've been playing with this tool for like a year now and I'm trying to break it and I can no longer break it. And this thing is amazing. People will respond to that because they trust me. And that's where I bring humility back into the equation, where it might not sound humble for me to say I can influence decisions. The only reason I say it is because I've experienced it and because I'm careful with it. What's the Spider-Man quote? With great power comes great responsibility. Yeah. I think that's really important. And how I maintain humility in this is I can lose that confidence that people have in me like that by simply misleading them only one time, especially if it's for like some kind of profit motive.
Yeah, so I love it. Well, good stuff. So that journey is so cool. And I hope it's encouraging to people to hear how you can come from some hard beginnings, you're humbled through that, and then can be recognized in that way. So I want to take a quick sponsor break, and then I want to come back and I want to get some thoughts you have about advisory and AI. So let's take a quick break real quick. I'm excited to share Divvy as an exclusive sponsor of the Thrivecast. Unlike expense management, spend management from Divvy now lets us provide cards to our team members, apply budgets to those cards with preset levels up front for each team member. And as we've implemented spend management, we no longer have to deal with the messy receipts on the back end of our expense management process. Check out getdivvy.com. That's GETDIVVY.com for more information on managing your funds and moving them to the front of your spend process. All right, we're back from the break. Thank you, sponsor. So, Seth, you're transparent about your journey. Now I want to get some thoughts just about our profession. You do tons of training. It means you're really on the cutting edge of a lot of things that are happening. And so I'm always wanting to get guests like you to tell me about AI, things like that. Mm-hmm. It's coming in full force. We're all still trying to figure it out. I think even the software companies that are giving it to us, they're trying to go, where do I put these prompts, mm-hmm. To let people really pull a lot of information and data out of our software. So what do you think about AI right now? Its use. What do you think about what we're going to have to do about AI in the future? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I obviously there's a lot of focus on ChatGPT, and
mm-hmm.
I definitely think there should be, but I think we also need to be thinking much bigger and broader and sort of mm-hmm. long range than that. Yeah. I mean, I think Sam Altman himself would tell you that whatever ChatGPT looks like and whatever it does now, it's all going to change dramatically, and it's changing faster. That's the thing. If you look back in history at technology and how it's influenced things, the rate at which it evolves has gotten much, much faster over many, many years. Mm-hmm. I mean, think about it. When we first went from green ledger paper to computers, and in those days, everybody freaked out. Like, oh, it's going to take our jobs away. It's accountants, computers are going to do everything. They're not going to need people, right? They had the same kind of freak out that they're having now about it.
Well,
by the way,
you and I remember the cloud too. That everybody freaked out about that too.
Yeah. That was well after we first went. I mean, when I was at Pace University, we had a course that was EDP auditing. Electronic data processing is what they called processing accounting data on a computer, right? And they had classes specifically for how to audit that stuff, right? That I remember taking. So the cloud was like even much later than that. Mm-hmm. But it was that you're right. They had the same freak out, like, oh my God, it's in the cloud. I can't go in the cloud. It's not secure in the cloud. Turns out it's more secure in the cloud than it is on your own computer, right? Right. Doug Sleater and I used to joke around all the time with people in those days and say, well, if you're worried about your data being in the cloud, then cancel your payroll service because all those payroll records are on a server somewhere, which is basically what it means to be in the cloud.
Right.
Also, your bank accounts. You should close your bank accounts because you know how you go online and access your banking? Well, that's because that's in the cloud. We used to kind of use these examples to illustrate the point. This is just another version of the same thing. Yeah. It's perhaps a scarier one. Yeah. No question.
Feels scarier to people.
But look at what's now happening, and it's only a short time after ChatGPT first came out and took the internet by storm, not last November, but the November before. So we're talking November of 2022. Yep. That's when it first launched. And at first, everybody was like, what is this thing? By December, everybody was like, oh my God, this thing is scary. It's amazing. I can't believe what it can do, right? And then you had a few of us early adopters industry really getting in there and playing with it. And, I looked at it right at the beginning and I said, okay, this is really cool. And I even looked at some of the videos that Jason Statz did on the subject. And I said, okay, that's really cool what he's doing. I need to figure out how to do that. And I played with it. And I even reached out to him on Twitter at one point because I couldn't get it to give me the kinds of answers he was getting. And he gave me like the one little tip I needed that kind of opened the floodgates for me. And boom, next thing I know, I'm doing a video saying, here's how you can get ChatGPT to actually keep accounting records for you. And I recorded a video, it's on my YouTube channel, that talked about how, you can feed it transactions and actually get it in table format to prepare a balance sheet and P&L. Did it make a lot of mistakes? Sure. I had to correct it on a number of things along the way. And it was very clear, and I made this point, you're not going to use this yet. But what's it going to look like in the future? I think it's going to be well beyond, keep in mind, ChatGPT is ultimately what it can do is it can write stuff. That's all it can do.
Yeah.
It can process huge volumes of information, and it can give me something in written form. It can't really do much else. Now you get apps that connect to ChatGPT, which can take what it can write, or for that matter, the information it can provide, and do more with it.
Yeah.
I've even had Google Slides based on a pretty simple prompt, create a 5-slide presentation complete with images that it pulled from Pexels, which is a free stock photography site. And it did a really scarily good job of creating that. I would never stick with it, but it was amazing. But here's where I think we're going even long term. And look what just came out, like literally weeks ago, as of the time we're recording this, is Apple's Vision Pro.
Yeah, totally.
Okay? And hands down, the best review I've seen of that, and there have been many already, is Casey Neistat. Hopefully everybody knows who he is. If you don't, Google him. He's talking about YouTube. He is one to follow on YouTube. And what he does, he's famously from New York City, and he's got this whole famous story, talk about struggles, where he was riding on like a motorcycle or a scooter, and he got hit by a car, and doctor said he was never going to run again, and he was an avid runner. Meanwhile, just last year, he broke 3 hours on a marathon.
Oh, wow.
Forward. So he goes around New York City one day with his Vision Pro on, and he's in the subway talking to people and just acting like it's normal for him to be wearing these big ski goggle looking things on his head. And he shows video recordings of what he can see from inside the Vision Pro. Plus, he's got his video guy obviously going along with him. And it was the best review I've seen because it was the most practical, where he was like, here's what it's going to look like when we have everybody's using this every day.
Yeah.
And it really gave you a clear look at the future. And so how does that go back to the accounting industry? And what I see, first of all, as Casey says himself in that review, this is the worst version of Vision Pro you're ever going to see.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's only going to get better. You'll get something that's much less clunky and heavy to wear. Google Glass, remember that?
Yeah.
That failed because it was ahead of its time, but also it was like, I remember trying it. It was too distracting. It was because it was too small. So I could see too much of what was around it. It wasn't completely immersive like Vision Pro is.
Yeah.
But how does that look in the accounting world? Well, here's what I think. I think of the e-commerce industry, right? And why e-commerce specifically? Because in 2024, every business is e-commerce. Your accounting firm is an e-commerce business, whether you want to see it that way or not. It is. It should be. If you're still sending invoices out, I'm sorry, but you're just way behind. I mean, years ago, I said, I'm going to flat rate billing because value pricing, and also because it's much more efficient. I hated spending time gathering timesheet data and producing invoices from that. What a colossal waste of time when it's so much simpler to eliminate time tracking and just say, here's what we're going to charge you every month. And then I automate a bill that goes out every month for the same amount. Everybody's happier on every possible level in that scenario. The client knows exactly what they're getting billed every month. I don't have to spend hours tracking time. My employees don't have to spend hours or panicking like most employees do, and then frankly, dishonestly putting it all together on the day before payroll, right? So it solves a lot of problems. So where's this all going to go? You're an e-commerce company. The data is gathered. I swipe my card, I go online, I fill out a form. It's so right from inception of a transaction, it's completely digital and automated. It will flow through. It'll get it through your sales channel and then through your payment gateway. And then there's tools like my favorite e-commerce app is Webgility that will grab your data from the sales channels and the payment gateways and feed it right into your accounting software. And now imagine this, Jason. Here's where I try and go very like Minority Report in terms of my vision of what our future looks like for accounting is I'm not going to have a laptop. I'm not going to have a keyboard. I'm getting my Humane AI pin shipped out to me hopefully next month that my wife got me for, she pre-ordered one for me for a holiday gift. And so there's going to be like no hardware. I'm going to have some kind of immersive augmented reality where I'm going to talk to an AI and say, show me my balance sheet. And I'm going to say, give me the details on fixed assets. Can you check that fixed assets agrees to the last tax return we filed? And if it doesn't, can you make the appropriate adjustments to make it so that it does? Everything is just going to be based on talking, language, LLMs, large language models. That's how we're going to do accounting in the future. I don't know if that's 5 years from now or 10, but I would say at the most 10. Is that there's no keyboards, no computers, no hardware. It's all just immersive, augmented reality.
I'm hearing that too. I'm hearing hardware is becoming something that may not be necessary because if you think about hardware, that's an input device, right? It's you got to type something into a piece of software to make it do something. And AI, of course, it's a conversational type software. Now we're typing into it. Of course, you can do voice too, but I'm hearing the same things, that hardware may be some of the things that go away. Certainly, I mean, even if there is a keyboard, the screen now, right, is becoming that Apple Pro, which is, I don't know, is that even a screen? Are those goggles even considered a screen? But it's a better screen, right? When you see the videos of Apple Pro Vision, it's all over your room, which is such a trip, you know?
Yeah. And well, I can't imagine, let's put it this way. What I can imagine is that it would take some getting used to typing on a virtual keyboard like that, where you can't actually feel, unless somehow, and I don't know if Vision Pro is there yet, but they have to be able to provide some kind of haptic feedback, so that when my virtual finger touches that key, there's some kind of a response that I can feel. So, because I can't, it would have to be very hard to type without some kind of physical, like haptic feedback. Like I know my Android phone with its keyboard will do that. It'll kind of, you'll feel a very slight vibration. So I kind of have my mental confirmation that I've actually tapped a key.
Yeah, I love it. Well, so I've had people on the show to try to give some predictions about AI. It's so interesting to hear it. Those predictions change just in a matter of months. Advisory also, I wanted to ask you about that. And I wonder even how AI will affect our advisory. We're an advisory firm, so we teach our team, to have opinions, right? We're building things that we can give opinions on to clients. How do you think advisory may change in the future? How will AI change how we do advisory? Do you have thoughts on that?
Definitely. For one thing, and at the forefront of that question, I want to say, I think it's going to force us, those of us who haven't gone the route of getting into offering advisory services, it's going to force you to. Because all of your bookkeeping and compliance, if you think about what I just described in terms of the flow of a transaction and where that's heading, bookkeeping is going to go away. It's going to be automated. 100%. It will be automated. And as you're probably hearing, I know I'm hearing it a lot too, what they're saying a lot about AI and how it's going to impact the way we work is the people who aren't taking the time now to learn, what they are now calling prompt engineering, to learn how to work with AI, to get ahead of that. Even if it's not practical to use it right now, it's a skill we definitely need to be learning and getting ahead of, because that's where I think it's going to go. It's going to force us to either leave the profession altogether, if all we ever wanted to do was bookkeeping and compliance work, or it's going to force us to go the advisory route. And what that looks like, again, using the example I just described, the data is going to be prepared for me. The financial statements are going to be compiled by AI, probably with some version of blockchain on the back end for extra auditability, right?
Wow.
And then I'm going to be able to look at a set of financial statements and rely on it. There's going to be a lot of what we might now be doing in an advisory capacity that will also go away. For example, sticking with the e-commerce example, I can probably have a conversation with my AI and create rules and say, hey, do me a favor. When my inventory for this particular product or supply gets below a certain level, check with the suppliers, assuming there's no difference in the product, see who's got the best price. And here's how we're going to layer these rules, but don't necessarily get me the cheapest if that means such a long delay in shipping that I'm going to run out of stock. In other words, we can create very complex rules that an AI can manage that would be much harder for a person to, right? But tell it, do the analysis, figure out if it's going to cost me the least and I'm not going to run out of stock, then just order the cheapest one. But if I'm going to run out of stock, find the cheapest one that I can get in time. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff that would take a person actually a lot longer to figure out. The AI will have it figured out in 2 seconds and then actually place the order for me, right? Give it the go ahead to place the order. Or if it's over a certain dollar amount, just check with me, right? Check my cash flow. The AI can also analyze my cash flow and tell that for you. You get where I'm going with this. So what it's going to do for advisory is the one thing that AI will never do, can never do, because it simply lacks the one important thing that you and I have, which is the humanity factor. Right. And so that's what advisory is going to look like. It's going to be that humanity factor of you and I talking to our clients and taking the analysis that the AI has compiled and prepared for us, and then talking and saying, let's make some decisions. What should we do with this information? What it may even look like is full circle back to how do we use this information to go back to the AI and prompt it and create an even better set of rules for its behavior for managing everything.
No, that's good. I love that. So and the e-commerce example is a really good one because those can be complicated accounting transactions, right? With multiple different complicated platforms, and AI can do that. But yeah, it'll give us information that we can now actually talk to our clients more quickly with more accurate data. And I didn't think about that, but when you talk to your client, you can actually update the AI while you're talking to them and make it even better. And then I know we're going to get to a point where AI can actually start learning us. I know it learns from the large language models, but it can start learning a lot of our preferences too. And I don't think it does that. I'm not sure. I may have heard it doesn't do that well. Like it's not going to remember you in a month and go, I remember you built the rule, or maybe it's doing that now. I don't know, but that's going to be even better.
I'll tell you how it is doing that for me. Because what I did, a lot of people, they'll stick with Chat GPT, and what they'll do is they'll create a different like chat transcript for each question that they might have. At one point I said, no, that's dumb. I want this thing to learn as much about me as it can. Yeah. So I created an assistant. Her name is Sandy in Chat GPT. And in the same transcripts, I feed her information and I tell her, you're going to be a copywriter for me. You're going to help me get ideas. And what I did was I fed her samples of my writing. And I said, I'm going to write these Facebook posts. And what I want you to do is, polish up the language a little bit, but make sure it's still in my voice. And also I want you to stick the emojis in there for me, because I don't have the patience to sit there trying to figure out what emoji to put, throughout like I want to do, because it makes it stand out when you put that post on Facebook. And so she does a brilliant job of that. And sometimes what I'll do now, because I don't love the way she rewrites my content, is I'll say, don't rewrite this, just stick the emojis in where I need them. And she'll do that. But over time now, like I can talk to her and I can reference a program of mine. Like I have my own community for accountants and bookkeepers. It's called 97 and Up. Yep. And so I can prompt her and say, hey, I'm doing something for 97 and Up. And she knows exactly what 97 and Up is. So I don't have to constantly re-prompt her to give her all the background and context for that. So because I'm using the same transcript, she's evolving and learning with me. Now, there is one caveat to this, which is that as I understand it, it can only remember so much information. So the workaround to that is periodically, once a week, whatever you think you need, have her summarize everything that she knows about you to date. And so that will kind of bring everything forward into her current memory so that things don't fall off on the back.
That's blowing my mind, Seth. Now, and you're saying you're on Chat GPT, so you're keeping the same running prompt. So that Chat GPT instance remembers everything within that running prompt. That's what you mean, right?
One example, very specific to what you and I are doing in this moment, is as I reached out to you, I reached out to a few other people in a similar vein because I said, I'd like to be on some more podcasts. It's fun. I really enjoy these conversations. Everybody wants a bio. So I went, and based on the fact that I knew she already knew a lot about me, I said, do me a favor. I'm going to be on a podcast soon. Can you write up a bio for me that I can give to the host? And she did. She wrote a beautiful bio for me. And then I said, can I reference this as my podcast bio so that in the future I can just say, hey, bring up my podcast bio and you'll feed it back to me? And absolutely. So you can actually, it's almost like I go back to my days of computer science where you can assign a variable to something, in this case, a name that you're giving her to reference something like that bio, so that I can have her call it up in a simple command, as in, can you call up my podcast bio? Boom, she'll do it.
Okay, so and the variable is podcast bio, and you're saying, remember, podcast bio means what you just created in this prompt.
She's going to give me this whole paragraph that she wrote for me. That's a perfect, succinct bio as of right now. Now, of course, at some point I want her to update it, and that's probably all I'll have to do is say, hey, can you update my podcast bio? And she'll be like, great, here it is, and I'll confirm I like it. We'll have a few iterations maybe, and then finally I say, okay, make this the new podcast bio, Remember, it's like talking to a person, but a person who can remember everything.
I love it. Well, this is so cool, and it's freaking me out too, Seth. So this is this is cool. Well, we're all right. We're out of time. This is so cool. So, Seth, I knew this would be an interesting podcast. So, how do people find you online? Kind of where would you tell them to go? I think they should go to your YouTube channel, but where else should they go?
Honestly, my website, just go to nerdenterprises.com. From there, you'll have access to everything I do. And the real quick thing I want to say there is you'll likely get a prompt within about 30 seconds inviting you to opt into my list. I promise you it's not spammy. It's not salesy. It's a heartfelt message that I write every week about what inspired me, what I learned that week. And then I do weave in some things about what programs I have coming out. But it's far from your typical, like, here's my program, click my junk and sign up for this kind of email. It's, it's a much more heartfelt, honest, authentic email from my heart to yours. So opt in, because that's the best way to keep on top of what I'm doing and where to go to find it.
Very cool. I love it. Well, Seth David, thank you for being on the Thrivecast, man. I really appreciate you coming into the airwaves all the way from Burbank, California.
Thank you, Jason. It's been an honor being here.
All right. Take care. We'll see you, man.